Welcome back. We're discussing Israel's land, sea and air assault on the Gaza Strip, which is entering its 10th day. And joining me are Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, a prominent defender of Israel. He's joining us from Miami in Florida. And from London, Dr. Ghada Karmi, an outspoken Palestinian activist and writer who teaches at Exeter University. As we get back to our questions, let's get to Ghazanfar in Saudi Arabia, who's been waiting very patiently. Ghazanfar, thanks for that. What's your question?
Well, it's not a question. I just have one comment after hearing some ridiculous assessment given by Mr. Dershowitz. And I actually wanted to place a comment on the topic today.
Okay.
I'll start with that first. When you say that what does Israel hope to achieve, unfortunately, because of its arrogant policies over the past 60 years, what has happened is that previously Israel was fighting a secularist association known as the PLO. Now this thing has entered into the Islamic radical theme, and these guys are associated with Iran and all that, and these guys don't want an Iranian proxy as their neighbor. And they need corrupt Arab regimes surrounding its borders so that they can secure their real. This is the plain and simple objective that we have here, and for the moment it seems to be working fine. The other thing is that, Mr. Dershowitz, I would request you to not to redefine yourself as a professor for law. You should call yourself as an ambassador for despotism. You claim to have said that Hamas kills children. I can give you countless examples. How about assassination of Saleh Shahada, where Israelis killed 16 children along with that guy?
Okay, Ghazanfar, let's get a quick response from the professor, then I want to get to Dr. Karmi back in.
Well, first of all, let me be very clear what my position is. I don't represent Israel. I oppose many Israeli policies. I've opposed the occupation since 1973. I favored the two-state solution since well before Israel favored the two-state solution. As far as the assassination of that terrorist leader was concerned, as you know, Israel gave him warning, and he made the decision, having sent his own son to become a suicide bomber who blew himself up and killed Israeli civilians. He then made the decision to keep his 4 wives and his children with him, knowing that he was going to be targeted. He made a decision, essentially, to turn his family into martyrs, and that's why they died. And I ask 2 more questions. Why doesn't Hamas show the pictures of the civilians that it has killed by its rockets, including Palestinian civilians? And the question I want to put to the good doctor is, what would you do if your civilians were being targeted by rockets, if rockets were landing in your kindergartens, if rockets were making your citizens of Sderot every single night hide in shelters? What would you do? Would you not respond? Would you simply allow it to happen? Or would you try to stop it by air attacks, and if they don't work, by ground attacks, and try to minimize civilian casualties the way Israel is doing? What would you do?
Dr. Karmi.
Well, I'll tell you what I wouldn't do, which is that I would not bomb the poor, destitute, wretched place that is Gaza. I would not kill its children. I would not destroy its infrastructure. I would not make its life even more miserable and destitute.
But what would you do?
What would you do? Wouldn't do. Now, what I would do, I will allow me to tell you. Allow me to tell you.
Okay.
What I would do is, first of all, to understand why these rockets are being fired at me, and secondly, having understood why, I would attend to the cause. Now, I will tell you the reason that these rockets are being fired. There is a closure on Gaza. There has been the most hermetic seal placed on Gaza that any human population has had to put up with in history. In history, there has been an if you want me to go back in history, I will do so.
Well,
Gaza has been occupied.
How do you compare that to what
years. The Israelis?
Yeah. No. It's been occupied for 60 years. The Egyptians occupied it for 20 years before that.
Okay, sorry, Professor. Let Dr. Ghada finish.
It has been occupied by. Please. It has been occupied by Israel for 41 years. In that time, it was made destitute. It has been de-developed. It has lost agriculture. It has lost human beings. It has lost resources. Then Israel imposed a closure on Gaza, which made it impossible, virtually impossible for Gazans to leave, to trade, to live any sort of normal life. Since 2006, the closure on Gaza has been tightened. The blockade on Gaza has led to widespread poverty, leading to semi-starvation, currently no electricity, hardly any water, no medicine, no food.
Dr. Karmi?
Now, the way to end the problem is to lift the blockade and to open the borders. That's what Hamas has asked for, has been very clear. So you tell me, Professor Dershowitz, why doesn't Israel do that?
Actually,
that will
very
solve the
simple.
problem.
Let me respond.
Why
Very
don't
simple.
they
Very
lift
simple.
the blockade?
Let me tell you very simply, because the blockade is there to prevent rockets from coming in. In fact, before the blockade, the rockets that came, there were many rockets before there was ever a blockade. There were simple Katyusha rockets. Then, when the blockade was opened, they got the Grad rockets and more sophisticated rockets, and they built the tunnels. The blockade is designed to prevent the rockets. The rockets came well before the blockade. Remember that the minute that Israel left and ended the occupation, many, many years ago, left and ended the occupation, that's when the rockets began. The closure was in response to the rockets. You still haven't answered my question. Short term, what do you do with rockets that are landing in your schoolyard? Do you simply accept them? Do you simply say, well, let's look at long-term solutions, but in the meantime, let the rockets come, wait till they hit a school, wait till they hit a kindergarten, wait till they hit a hospital, let them play Russian roulette with our children, but we're not going to do anything militarily to stop them. Would you accept that?
We cannot actually have a proper conversation with this drama and this hype going on. This is not a Hollywood movie. What Israel has to do is to first of all talk to Hamas, and in talking to Hamas, find out the terms that Hamas is asking for. That's what, after all, two sides to any conflict do. They sit down and they talk. The problem with Israel
won't recognize
is that it
Israel's
is
right
not
to exist?
capable of talking. What it wants is to act. Tell me, does Israel recognize the Palestinians' right to have a state of their own, to lead normal lives, not to be besieged, not to have a wall built across their territory,
let me just intervene here.
not to have their resources plundered?
Let me intervene here with a couple of very quick questions. Let me intervene with a couple of quick questions. Dr. Karmi, first to you, an email question that came in from N. Ntalaluka in Tanzania. Ntalaluka in Tanzania says, Israel will never end Hamas and Islam. I don't know why the Arab countries don't take any action against Israel while this is happening to fellow Arabs. Why is the Arab world so quiet in relative terms?
Well, this is very, very disappointing for most of us who feel so badly about what is being done to Gaza. The problem is that many Arab states, governments, I'm not talking about their people, are states which have particular relationship to America. And this relationship is unequal. Very briefly, they are mostly, we could describe them almost as client states. Now, the America being a staunch backer of Israel means that in order to retain America's favor, these governments have to act in a way which does not conflict with American interests. That's in a nutshell. Of course, it's a bit more complicated than that, but in a nutshell, that's what it's really about.
Thank you, Dr.
Now,
Dr.
the problem is, of course, let me just say that, of course, this is not a position that is actually very helpful for the Arab states themselves, let alone for the Gazans.
Okay, let me get a quick question in here that came by email to Professor Dershowitz here. Came in from the UAE, sir. And this says, Samawan Osman says, there would be no need for Palestinian suicide bombers if Israel was to respect international law and treat the Palestinians with justice. There would be no security problem for Israel if it did not oppress the Palestinian people. I wonder, how do you view this argument that the attack on Gaza by Israel, whatever the reasoning behind it is, will generate more hate and perhaps create more extremism which will target Israel?
Well, we've heard that argument before, and there's just no evidence to support it. Israel offered in 2000 and 2001 a Palestinian state contiguous in the West Bank, all of Gaza, $35 billion refugee package, capital in Jerusalem. The Saudi Arabians supported it, the Egyptians supported it, the Jordanians supported it. And Yasser Arafat responded by starting the Second Intifada, which killed 1,000 Israelis and 4,000 Palestinians. Prince Bandar called that a war crime. Israel wants peace. Hamas is the barrier to peace. You can't sit down and talk to Hamas because it doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist. It rejects all the peace proposals that were made. They reject the Saudi peace plan, the Geneva peace plan. The best thing that could happen for the Palestinian people
Yep.
would be for Hamas to be substantially weakened or destroyed by Israel.
Okay, Professor.
And then Israel, under new President Barack
Professor,
Obama, could make a similar offer and finally make peace with the Palestinians.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you both. We've run out of time, but I thank you both for taking part in this discussion. I hope to speak with you both again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. On the next show, we discuss American policy towards the Gaza crisis and what to make of President-elect Barack Obama's silence so far. We'll see you next time.